I straightened my shirt collar nervously as Zara guided me through the grand entrance of her family's estate. At 23, being a single father to my 2-year-old son Alex had taught me to present myself well, even when I felt out of place. The golden crescent pendant hung against my chest as I stepped forward to meet her father. But when Omar al-Rashid saw the distinctive handcrafted design of the medallion, his entire world froze. "Papa," 21-year-old Zara placed her hand on her father's shoulder. "What's wrong? Your face just went white." The 49-year-old petroleum mogul stood completely still, his gaze locked on the jewelry around my neck. His fingers started shaking as he recognized the unique pattern, a custom piece with intricate Arabic calligraphy intertwined with Celtic knots. "Nice to meet you, Mr. al-Rashid," I said with respect, offering my hand. "Zara always talks about you." Omar didn't react. His attention was completely focused on the golden emblem he remembered commissioning 24 years ago. "Omar," his wife Nadia called from the dining table, her voice concerned. "What's happening to you?" Finally, Omar snapped back to reality and managed a forced smile. "Sorry about that. That pendant you're wearing is quite unusual. It looks handmade. Where did you get it?" I touched the chain unconsciously. "This thing? It was my mom's. She died when I was born, and my grandmother kept it for me." Omar's wine glass slipped from his trembling hands, shattering against the marble floor. The crash rang through the dining area. "Papa," Zara shouted, leaping from her seat. "What's going on?" Nadia jumped up too, alarmed. "Omar, you're frightening everyone." But the multimillionaire remained frozen. That pendant was one of a kind, commissioned from a jeweler in Little Armenia 24 years earlier for someone he'd loved and lost. "May I see it closer?" Omar asked, his voice rough. "The design is remarkably intricate." I hesitated but lifted the chain over my head and handed it to him. Omar turned it over with shaking hands, revealing the engraved initials on the back. "D.K.," he whispered, reading the inscription. "And a date. May 3rd, 2000. What's your birthday?" Omar asked, though he already knew the answer. "May 3rd, 2000, I replied, confused. "Why are you asking?" Zara stared between her father and me. "Papa, why these strange questions? You're making me nervous." Omar studied every feature of my face, searching for the resemblances he now recognized, the dark eyes, the jawline, the way I tilted my head. "D.K.," Omar repeated quietly. "Diana Kaplan." "How do you know my mother's name?" I asked, my voice sharpening. Omar al-Rashid's composure crumbled. "Because I loved her. And because I was the father of the baby she was carrying when she died." The room fell silent except for the sound of Nadia's sharp intake of breath. None of them knew I hadn't appeared at their home randomly. For the past year, I'd been piecing together fragments of my mother's life. My grandmother had finally given me a box of my mother's belongings on my 22nd birthday, including old letters, photographs, and a journal that mentioned Omar's name repeatedly. "That's impossible," Nadia whispered. "Maya was adopted. Her birth parents were unknown." "Were they?" Omar walked to his desk and opened a locked drawer with shaking hands. He pulled out a manila folder. "I've been searching for her for 24 years, Marcus. Every private investigator, every database search, every lead that went nowhere." "You're saying that I'm your biological son?" I asked. I'm saying that I was 25 years old and engaged to be married when your mother told me she was pregnant. My family threatened to disown me. The business deals my father had arranged would have collapsed. I panicked. So you abandoned her, I said, my voice growing cold. I offered her money, Omar admitted, shame filling his voice. $60,000 to handle the situation quietly. I thought it would solve everything. But she didn't take it, I stated. She disappeared instead. Changed her name, moved to a different state. I hired investigators for years, but she'd covered her tracks completely. I thought she'd had the abortion and just wanted to disappear from my life. My grandmother told me what really happened, I said. Mom kept a detailed journal. She documented everything, including your threats and bribes. I pulled out photocopies from my jacket, pages from my mother's journal in her own handwriting, describing the meetings with Omar, his family's pressure, and her decision to leave California. She moved to Oregon and changed her last name to Thompson, I continued. She died in childbirth, and I was adopted by the Thompsons. They never told me I was adopted until they died in a car accident when I was 16. Omar sank into his chair. I searched for Diana Kaplan for decades. I never thought to look for Thompson. Zara picked up one of the journal pages with trembling hands. Papa, this is your handwriting on some of these notes. How did you find us? Nadia asked. After my adoptive parents died, I found the adoption papers, I explained. It took me 6 years to track down my mother's real identity and her connection to your family. I've been working as a freelance researcher, I know how to find information. Zara looked between us, tears forming. So you and I are half-siblings? Yes, I confirmed. And I've been dating you for 8 months, getting to know our father through your stories, waiting for the right moment to confront him. Omar looked up with horror. You planned this entire relationship? I needed to know what kind of man you'd become, I replied. Whether you felt any remorse. Whether you ever tried to find out what happened to us. The truth was devastating, but it was just the beginning. But there's something else you need to know about Mom's death, I continued. She didn't just die in childbirth. She died because she couldn't afford proper prenatal care. She was working 3 jobs and had no insurance. Omar's face went white. And there's more, I said, pulling out additional photocopies. Mom was investigating something before she died. She was working part-time for an environmental group, documenting illegal dumping by oil companies in low-income neighborhoods. As a single father myself, I understand now why she was so determined to create a safer world for children. I showed them pages from my mother's research notes, with Omar's company name highlighted multiple times. She had evidence that Al-Rashid Petroleum was paying city officials to overlook waste disposal violations in poor communities. She was going to publish her findings. That research was never completed, Omar said quickly. Nothing was ever proven. Because she died before she could finish it, I replied. But I completed her work. I'm an environmental researcher now, Mr. Al-Rashid. I've spent 3 years verifying every lead she documented. I pulled out a thick folder. Photos of contaminated sites. Water quality reports. Medical records showing increased cancer rates in affected neighborhoods. Financial records I'd obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests. Nadia grabbed Omar's arm. Tell me this isn't true. Omar couldn't meet her eyes. 6 months ago, I submitted a formal complaint to the EPA, I continued. They've been investigating quietly. The preliminary findings support everything my mother documented. At that moment, my phone buzzed with a text message. Perfect timing. That's my contact at the EPA, I said, showing them the message. The federal investigation has been approved. They'll be serving warrants next week. Omar stood up unsteadily. What do you want from me? I want you to publicly acknowledge that you're my father, I said. I want you to admit that your company's illegal practices contributed to the environmental damage my mother was investigating. And I want you to establish a cleanup fund for the affected communities. If I refuse, then the EPA investigation proceeds without your cooperation. The media gets copies of my mother's research and your journal entries about abandoning her. And your daughter learns that her father chose money over family. Zara was crying now. You both lied to me. You used me to get to him, and he's been lying about who he really is. Zara, I said gently, I did fall in love with you. That wasn't part of the plan. That's what made this so hard. But you still went through with it, she whispered. Because some things are bigger than what I want, I replied. Because my mother died pursuing justice, and I couldn't let that work be for nothing. And because I'm raising a son who deserves to grow up in a world where powerful people are held accountable for their actions. The confrontation wasn't the dramatic explosion I'd originally planned. Instead, it was the beginning of a longer, more complex process of truth-telling and accountability. 2 years later, Omar al-Rashid stood before a federal judge, accepting a plea agreement for environmental crimes. He received 3 years in prison and his company paid $40 million in cleanup costs and community health programs. Your Honor, Omar said during his statement, I take full responsibility for my actions 24 years ago and the harm my company has caused to vulnerable communities. In the courtroom, I sat with Zara, who had slowly begun to rebuild our relationship after months of family therapy. We'd learned that healing from betrayal takes time and professional help. After the sentencing, Omar approached us in the hallway. I know I can't undo the past, he said. But I want to try to be the father and grandfather I should have been. I looked at my 2-year-old son Alex, who was sleeping in his stroller. It's not about what you want anymore, I replied. It's about what he needs. And what he needs is consistency, honesty, and someone who shows up even when it's difficult. I'm willing to try, Omar said. Then prove it, I answered. Not with money or grand gestures. With small, consistent actions over time. 6 months later, the Diana Kaplan Environmental Justice Center opened in the neighborhood where my mother had lived. Omar volunteered there twice a week, teaching business skills to young people and helping coordinate the ongoing cleanup efforts. My mother wanted to give voice to communities that had been ignored, I said at the opening ceremony. Today, through this center, her work continues. From the audience, both Zara and Omar applauded. We were learning that justice isn't about perfect endings, it's about people taking responsibility for their actions and working to repair the damage they've caused. A year later, I completed my master's degree in environmental science. At graduation, I wore my mother's pendant, now understanding its full significance. For 22 years, I wondered about my origins, I said in my speech as the student speaker. I learned that understanding your past isn't about blame, it's about taking the best parts of that history and using them to build something better. Omar, who had been released after serving 18 months, watched from the audience next to Zara and Alex. He was learning what it meant to be present for the important moments. Zara and I never became romantic partners again, but we built a strong friendship based on honesty about our complicated family situation. She became a social worker, specializing in helping families navigate difficult reunifications. I focused on expanding the Environmental Justice Center and raising Alex, who grew up knowing his complete family history, both the painful parts and the healing that followed. In interviews, I always emphasize the same principle: justice isn't about punishment for its own sake. It's about creating accountability that leads to positive change. Today, the Diana Kaplan Environmental Justice Center has helped clean up contaminated sites in 12 communities and provides health monitoring for thousands of families. Omar serves on the board and has become a respected advocate for corporate environmental responsibility. The story didn't end with dramatic revenge, it ended with the harder work of rebuilding trust, taking accountability, and creating institutions that prevent similar harm from happening to others. I learned that the most powerful response to abandonment isn't to abandon others in return. It's to show up consistently for the people and communities that need you most. My mother's legacy isn't defined by how she died, but by the work she started and the positive change that grew from her research. Omar's legacy won't be defined by his past mistakes, but by how he spent the rest of his life making amends for them. And Alex will grow up in a family that knows how to have difficult conversations, take responsibility for mistakes, and work together to solve problems, because that's what real families do.